Jim, always good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Sean, it's great to be here. And are we all having fun or what?
You know what? I'm going to get to that because you've got a new poll out. I want to break it down. CBS YouGov has a poll out. It's
Yep.
the what you're saying is not just contained to us anymore, which is great. So I want to kind of walk this through. But I thought it was pretty cool last night as I'm getting ready for the Super Bowl. Uh, I looked down and sure enough, I don't know if it was on Air Force One or what, but Trump truths out your the polling from that you guys
Yep.
just put out. And it's like, I mean, I know each of us has like a cool moment or here and there, but like you got to think back to like when you and John, your brother, were setting this thing up. The
Yep.
idea of saying, can you imagine a day when the president of the United States like pushes out our polling? Because it wasn't about. I mean, obviously it had a lot to do with him. We're going to talk about that, but I thought on a personal level, it's just got to be a pinch me moment.
It's funny too, Sean, because you and I know in our business, we're in a crazy business. I mean, people never take off. It's 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And it's funny, one of the reasons I look forward to the Super Bowl is kind of the email and the text traffic. It stops. But yesterday, my phone starts blowing up, and I'm like, what's going on? And President Trump truthed out our poll that came out not too long ago. And it's just, it's always a neat thing. And it's funny because, we live in this world now of hits and followers and all that other kind of stuff. But I will tell you something, nothing gets more action than when Donald Trump goes
Yeah.
and gives somebody a shout out. Good,
What
bad, or indifferent.
did you call your brother John or did he call you? Or I mean, like at some point you got to be like, dude, that's like,
You know what? Three or four people sent it to me, and obviously sent it to John at first, and then boom, it kind of just
all right,
blew up from there. But that's the crazy part is think about it. Yesterday we have the Super Bowl, and look at the contrast. When Joe Biden was president, he wouldn't even do those easy
right.
softball interviews that the media we all knew were going to give him before the Super Bowl. They were turning those things down. And who was the star at the Super Bowl yesterday? It wasn't Pat Mahomes, God bless him. I'm a big fan, or Jalen Hurts, who was the MVP, or Taylor Swift. Donald Trump was the Super Bowl
Yeah,
yesterday. He was the star of the Super Bowl. I mean, it's pretty amazing when you think about it, how far he's come.
I agree. I want to talk about because this actually ties in exactly to the polling. Um, let's just start with this. Where are we now as a country versus a month and a half or even 2 months ago from what when you guys do the baseline poll, what does the environment look like now versus then? Better, worse, what?
Better. The American people really like what they're seeing from Donald Trump. There was an insider advantage poll. There was our poll, had him at a 56% job approval when you just test the policy and you like what he's doing. Those are the highest numbers Donald Trump has ever had. The YouGov CBS poll, they had Donald Trump with a 53% approval rating. And, their polls tend to be a little bit biased against Donald Trump. I would make an argument they probably undersampled Republicans a little bit, but still had him at 53% and the highest approval rating he's ever had. Oh, by the way, in that poll, he had a 55% approval rating among voters under 30. So that tells you that he's expanding the coalition. The other question, which I thought was super interesting in that CBS YouGov poll, was that 70% of Americans say that Donald Trump is keeping his promises.
Yeah.
You never hear that where the American people, that's one of the big gripes that the American people, that voters have with politicians, is they say one thing on the campaign trail and then they do something else. But if you look at Donald Trump, you look what he's trying to do here. And to be quite honest with you, I think the Democrats are making some big mistakes by some of the issues that they're going after him on, where they're attacking him for wanting to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. We're bankrupt.
Yeah.
Joe Biden gave us a bankrupt America with $36 trillion in debt. And even you have some smart Democrats, folks like Rahm Emanuel and folks like James Carville, saying, don't attack him for going after Doge. We should be trying to help him on issues like that. So we're in a very interesting political dynamic right now, Sean.
Well, the thing is, right out of the gate, you guys, the voter optimism shifted to the right. There's now a net 16-point move towards what people think the country is moving. So is that solely him, or is that other economic statistics that they're seeing in their life?
What's interesting about that, Sean, is that even after Donald Trump won, the wrong track number stayed really bad. And we all saw it with voters on election day. You had 70% of voters telling us the country was off on the wrong track. It was going a heck in a handbasket. And even over the next month or two, that number didn't really get better because people didn't feel like things were getting better. Now, what's happened is over the last 3 weeks, since the inauguration, they like what they're seeing from Donald Trump. They like the fact that he's looking to make us energy independent again. They like the fact that he's getting rid of these onus regulations. They like the fact that he wants to lower their tax burden and put more money in the American people's pockets. And they look at what he's doing on the issue of immigration, in spite of the Democrats and their allies in the media attacking him on the immigration policies. It's usually 6 out of 10 Americans at least support what he's doing at the border. And you know what? I like to point out that, remember how the media and the Democrats were telling us we couldn't fix the immigration problem without bipartisan immigration reform? The president has the tools in this toolbox to fix the immigration problem. The voters figured it out that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, they didn't want to fix the immigration problem. They were making it worse. And they see it now in real time that Donald Trump is making that crisis better at the border. Still a lot of work to do, but we're getting there.
Don't you think the thing that I think is so fascinating about immigration is the visual sell it, right? So for a long time, you pointed out we were told there wasn't a problem. The border is secure. There's nothing that's happening. We're going to deal with the root cause. And
Yeah.
when Donald Trump gets elected, for the last 2 weeks, like every day we've seen on television some kind of like ICE raid or criminals getting rounded up. And it's like once you see it's not hypothetical anymore, right? And how much do you
Yeah.
think because I give the White House a ton of credit, not just the White House, but the entire team. Like Kristi Noem went out there and she was in the police vest and the hat showing it makes it real because now you go, wow, look at them with the bad guys.
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt. And you know what? What's great is people like Kristi Noem, folks like Tom Homan, they know the issue backwards and forwards. And when the media tries to attack them for literally getting criminal illegal aliens out of the country, making us all safer, they can push back on that. And the fact that they're out there, remember, and you look at the contrast between what you're seeing from Tom Homan, what you're seeing from Kristi Noem, and then look at it versus, what was going on there with Alejandro Mayorkas, who was never out there, who was constantly lying to the American people, telling us the border was secure when we all knew that the border wasn't secure. And then you get a headline in the New York Post last week where they're saying illegal crossings within 2 weeks of Donald Trump taking over are down 90%. How much safer does that make us? How much better does that make us with the economy? And let me make one other point, Sean, is the voters. I spent so much time, especially in focus groups, talking to swing voters about the immigration issue, in the battleground states. And they told us they understood it. It not only was a safety issue, but they also understood that it affected every aspect of the American people's lives. They were paying for these folks coming into the country. They were paying for welfare benefits for illegals. It was hurting our healthcare system. Hospitals were getting overwhelmed, especially in the emergency rooms. It was hurting our public schools. And the American people understood that. We're really the only people that were talking about that were the Republicans, and the media was trying to suppress that. But again, the American people, I say this, they're much smarter. I like to call them now, we used to call them the left stream media. Now they're the USAID media. They were bought and paid for by the left, and now they're the USAID media, and the American people see right through it.
Do you think it? So one of the things that I get why, but like when Republicans go on, like, hang out with Politico or CNN or whatever, to me, I like the approach that, like, Doge has taken to agencies, which is pull the root out, get rid of
Yeah.
it, kill it. I don't want to prop up, like, I think with all the stuff that Caroline has done in the briefing room and Trump, I'm like, it's making so much more reforms. I don't think you should hurt the media, meaning, like,
Yeah.
don't subscribe to them, but we shouldn't help them, and we shouldn't give them credibility by, like, going out and doing events with them. So, like, CNN is selling, that they have these guests on, or Politico.
Yeah.
Like, my view is, guys, they get to report. That's codified in the First Amendment, but it doesn't mean that we have to be complicit in it by going on their programs or
Without a doubt.
showing up to their events.
Without a doubt. And Sean, I think that's a terrific point. And one of the things that the Trump campaign did, led by Susie Wiles and Chris Lasavita, is they did a great job of going around the traditional media, whether it was with the podcast, whether it was with social media. Like, you'd see all this stuff on social media and people would say, oh, those are paid Trump people. Most of that stuff was organic,
Right.
because they believed in Donald Trump's agenda. Donald Trump was inspiring these folks. And look, I think what you're seeing, whether it's guys like Jim Acosta leaving and Chuck Todd and
Leaving?
whatnot. Yeah.
We're,
I'm
like,
trying to
being
be
pushed.
I'm trying to be polite.
I know.
And, literally getting fired by the networks, Sean. I think that's the American people deciding, okay, which media do we believe in?
Right.
Which media do we think is credible out there? And I think, you look at something like X, Twitter, whatever the heck you want to call it, but that whole community notes thing, which Facebook has now adopted, that's the American people telling us what the truth is. And what we're finding out is the American people are doing a much better job of telling us about the truth than the quote unquote, mainstream media has been doing over the years. And which is something you lived with every day for how many years that you were working in politics, Sean?
Yeah, I know. Speaking of the American people telling us something, I think it was interesting because your poll and the CBS poll both showed the issue of inflation is still a problem, right? So you guys said 84% of the American people had negatively been impacted by inflation. 50% were having trouble affording basic necessities. This is why economic issues will still lead voter concerns. 42%, social issues are 20, and security, which, to be honest with you, and let me look this up here, it mirrors the CBS poll that says that's still the big issue. The thing that I found fascinating, so it's border in CBS's poll was still the top of the issue with 31, and then inflation came down 27. There seems to be more concern among the CBS write-up about people saying, okay, you're doing all this other stuff, but what are you doing to bring down prices? Is that just, do you think, a matter of time, meaning he needs a little bit more time to get his, policies in place that'll bring down inflation, or is that warranted?
Oh, look, the American people got crushed by the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris economy. And it's like, look, I always tell the candidates and the politicos that we work for, look, it's not one issue. I think it was like CBS YouGov asked the question over the summer, how important each of the following issues were going to be. And they asked them singularly by themselves, things like inflation, the economy, et cetera, immigration, crime. And many of them were over 90% when you ask them singularly. It's like, and you know who gets it better than anybody? Donald Trump. He gets it better than anybody. He said, we've inherited a mess. We've inherited big problems. And the American people are smart. They understand it that Donald Trump isn't going to bring down the price of eggs in a month. It's going to take time. But it's one of the reasons he's got these high job approval ratings now, is because they like what he's doing. They understand energy independence is going to bring down inflation. They understand lower taxes is going to bring down inflation. Just like the great economists Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell have been telling us for years, what creates inflation? Excessive government spending. That's what Doge is all about. If you're going to bring down inflation, you got to bring down all this crazy spending that's going on, and with tax policies, with deregulation, with cutting the government spending. that's going to put more money in the pockets of the middle class. It's going to put more money in the pockets of small businesses. And the American people get that. And you still have 84%. Because look, inflation, when I used to do, I think we talked about this during the campaign. When I would tell people in focus groups that inflation was around, prices had gone up about 20% when while Joe Biden was president, those swing voters would yell at us and say, no, it's gone up way higher than that. Because when they looked at the cost of food and groceries, housing, utilities, etc., they were right. They had gone up a lot more than 20%. And they understand it's going to take some time. They like what they're seeing from Donald Trump and his administration and what they're doing to try to bring down the cost of living.
Well, it's interesting because you asked some questions in your poll that I thought were fascinating. Uh, the first one was capitalism versus socialism, and capitalism won out 64-12. I got to be honest with you. I actually was shocked at that number because I think so many of these young folks believe that socialism is a great thing. I loved
Yeah.
the answer. I was actually my heart. I was like, thank goodness I'm wrong on this. But
Yeah.
were you shocked at that answer? And where do you think the division is? Is it an age thing?
No, we've been asking that question for a while. One of the things that we did a poll a few years back in New York City among Democratic primary voters, in New York City, and these are mostly these white progressives. You had over 60% that had a favorable opinion of socialism. It's because, this goes back to our education system and whatnot. Voters are getting it. That this big government socialism that they've been pulling on us, and they say, hey, we're not going to do the kind of socialism that they do in some of these Latin American countries. And then you have the Bernie Sanders and the AOCs of the world. They tell us that oh no, we're going to do what Finland and Norway and Sweden and those places do. And then Finland, Norway, and Sweden tell you we're not socialist countries. We believe in free market capitalism. So look, again, where Donald Trump, he talked about it in the interview that he just had with Brett Baer. He said, we've got to show success. He gets it. This isn't about retribution or all this other kind of nonsense that the press and the Democrats like to propagate among the American people. This is about if his stuff works, that's when the voters are going to see it. They're going to see things like free market capitalism is the best thing in the world. And look, it is. It works time and time again. Whenever we do things like lower taxes, less government, and more freedom, it always works. There's a reason why all these folks in Latin America and Mexico, et cetera, want to come to this country, because they're trying to get away from all these Marxist authoritarian dictators. And look, it's also one of the reasons why so many Hispanic voters have come on board with the Republican Party now, because they saw the failures in their countries, and now they've come to America. Why? For things like free market capitalism.
So that segues nice into what I was going to ask you, because you guys had a question there about whatever the president's calling it now, this external tax division. Like it would be like the IRS, but for collecting tariffs. So he keeps talking about using tariffs, right? He's Canada, Mexico. He's now doing steel and aluminum. I think Europe's probably on the chopping block next.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question, I don't think, that at least in the short term, I get why he's doing it for a variety of reasons. And we can put that aside, because ultimately, I think that he wants U.S. manufacturers and job creators to come back to the U.S. instead of building stuff. Okay. That being said, you can't do that in a day, right? I think there's no question about it. He has publicly said, hey, there might be some short-term pain, because if that widget that you're buying from, say, Europe gets a tariff put on it, say you're buying a $100 widget and there's a 20% tariff, that's going to now cost you $120 because they put a 20% tariff on it. What do you think that does short-term, long-term to his approval rating?
Yeah. Look, I think as long as the American people see success, and we're seeing it early on here, and I just kind of laugh at the media. They're all worried about the price of eggs now. They're worried about inflation. Well, Donald Trump hasn't even been in office yet for 3 weeks. They didn't care about it, and they were making excuses for Joe Biden's inflation when he was president. But look, the reason why Donald Trump won was because they did an easy contrast. They did an easy contrast between Donald Trump's presidency versus Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's presidency. And they said, you know what? The stuff under Donald Trump, it worked really, really well. And I think they have a lot of confidence in what Donald Trump is going to do. And what Donald Trump talks about all the time, it's common sense. And look,
That's
even
the
with
key word, Jimmy. That's it. See, you just put your finger on it. That's, to
yeah,
me, it keeps going back. It's common sense.
it's common. And look, I want to go back to all these tariffs that everybody talks about. Even with the proposed tariffs from President Trump, our tariffs are still lower than most of the other ones that are happening, whether it's in, Central America, Latin America, Mexico, Europe, etc. And not only do they throw tariffs on it, you got places like Canada. We all love our Canadian brothers and sisters, but they have something there called the value added tax, which is just another fancy word for a national goods and services, a sales tax. So they're also putting sales taxes on these American goods. And I think that Donald Trump's economic policies are not only going to be good for America, I think they're going to be good for the world because they're going to make all these other countries look at it. Why do we have these tariffs? Donald Trump is an international businessman. He owns properties. He owns, golf clubs, golf resorts. I shouldn't call them clubs because they're really not. They're like the ultimate resorts all over the world. He wants to do business for America all over the world, but he also wants to sell American goods and services here. He understands that we want to make things as inexpensive as possible here, especially when it comes to manufacturing. And he started to have a manufacturing boom when he was president, and he wants to recreate that, not just in America, but throughout the world.
So, I mean, like I said, he says this personally that there might be some short-term pain.
Yeah.
If that's the case, and I get it. I mean, which I think is brilliant because he understands it. It's sort of like watching the wave come ashore. You know it's coming. You're warning people about it. How much leeway does he have, though, right? To say, guys, we're going to go through the short-term thing, but trust me, it's going to take a little while, and we're going to reap the full benefits of this.
Look, I think as long as the American people see he's taking the country in the right direction, he will be fine. Because I look at it like this, and one of the things I think they get and they understand is the reason why the Republicans had a bad midterm back in 2018 was because they passed the tax cuts late. They didn't pass them till right before the end of the year. We hadn't started seeing the benefits yet. And boom, like literally right before COVID, Donald Trump had incredible numbers. Before we shut down before COVID, he had just, the impeachment nonsense had gone away. Again, he had approval ratings over 50%. We were doing really well in the battleground states, et cetera. He understands that's why he's working in such an expedited fashion here, and he wants to get things done. I wasn't in the meeting last week when he was meeting with the members of Congress about, pushing the agenda forward, especially when it came for the tax cuts. And he said, look, the American people voted for this. This is what I'm hearing from other folks, members of Congress. They said, we got to get this done as soon as possible. Why? Because the American people need relief. And we want to make sure that the American people are feeling significantly better before the 2026 elections. And that's how the Republicans will do well in those elections. Because look, the history tells us the Republicans are going to lose on average. The party in power, the party that controls the White House, usually loses about 25 seats in the midterms. Now Bill Clinton actually bucked that trend back in '98. George W. Bush did it in 2002 because voters felt the economy was going well, and it was post September 11th. So look, the American people need relief. We hear it from them all the time. They know the economy is broken, but they like what they're seeing here from Donald Trump. And I think they'll give him a lot of leeway. And again, the fact that he's keeping his promises and he's doing things that they think will make the economy better.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's a lot more. He communicates a lot more now in a way that I think people are like, okay. Before I get into some of the other politics, on the Doge issue, this Department of Government Efficiency, I think that's, you mentioned the word common sense. And I'm like,
Yeah.
The idea that you're actually auditing things, like Elon put out a thing the other day, like expenses should have codes in them, like any normal
Yeah.
business would do, so you know how much you're spending in this area. The idea that the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, can't pass an audit for 8 years, like that doesn't, like, people go, wait, so you spend basically $1 trillion a year and you don't know where it is? That's a problem. I think the common sense is what is so great, right? Even on trade,
Yeah.
the idea that
Yeah.
it's like, wait a second, you want access to our market to sell your cars in, but we can't go to your country and sell our cars. Like, that doesn't make sense. The
Yeah.
question on Doge for me, though, and it just, like, I get so excited when I see these tweets, like whether it's the penny or USAID, it's like, I mean, it doesn't make sense. A penny costs almost 3 cents to make. Why are we making a penny? So I'm excited when he does this, but here's where I think the rubber's going to meet the road. You know, they always, what was the old thing that they used to ask that was whoever the bank robber was, why do you rob banks? He
Yeah.
said, because that's where the money is.
That's where
The
the money
real
is.
money, that's the real money is in Medicare, Medicaid. If they go in there and start reforming, and I'm not talking cutting, reforming,
Yeah. Yeah.
does he have to be concerned about that? Because that's where the Dems are finally going to have a message, and they'll lie and say that it's massive cuts and it's hurting people. But that's, to me, those programs are going bankrupt. And any politician who says I'm not going to touch them is basically on the side of insolvency and bankruptcy. And so if you go in and try to save them through common sense reforms, you're actually the hero. But I don't think
Yeah.
the Dems are going to sell it that way. And that's the one
Yeah.
danger I have. So if you're him, do you advise him, hey, Mr. President, stay away from those programs because the Democrats will go nuts on you? Or is it, let Elon in there, let's find some common sense reforms, and then you go out there and sell them?
Yeah. And what did they find just on an initial audit, I believe it was, into Medicaid? You know, and obviously Medicaid's different than Medicare and Social Security, but into Medicaid, it was about $250 million in payments were going to dead people. And then we're finding out that, you know, there's Social Security payments going to illegals who have fake Social Security numbers. These what Doge is going to do, and Donald Trump he's always been adamant about this. He's not cutting Social Security. He's not cutting Medicare. What he's going to do is get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse, and he's actually going to save those programs. And you know what the worst thing in the world was for Social Security? Inflation. Inflation just kills it. When we had the 9% inflation that one year, you know, payments had to go up 10% to stay with the cost of living adjustments. And look, the seniors, they were entitled to that. But the most important thing we can do to save those programs, get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse. The other thing that Donald Trump is a big believer in, and people say, remember how they all told us, if because of Donald Trump's tax cuts, the CBO was telling us that it was what we were going to lose $1.9 trillion. Well, you know what? They were off. They were off by about $2 trillion. Because what's happened is since Donald Trump's tax cuts, the revenues to the federal government are up about 50%. But what's happened? They've been spending money like drunken sailors. The whole idea about growing the economy is for Donald Trump to create more taxpayers, increase revenues, get rid of the waste out of those entitlement programs. And that's how you're going to save those programs. Because remember, Sean, it wasn't that long ago, they were telling us that you know, we got a $7 trillion budget and there's no waste. I can specifically remember Joe Biden telling us there was no waste in a $7 trillion budget. The one thing we've learned over the last few weeks, there is all kinds of waste.
Oh,
And one of the things that just came out last night, $59 million in FEMA funds that are going to high-end hotels in New York City to keep, you know, illegal immigrants basically in these high-end hotels. Well, what about the American citizens that are dealing with the wildfires in California that we don't have enough resources with? Those folks in Western Carolina that don't have enough resource? Let's do the America First agenda. Let's give the American people confidence that their money is being spent on what it's supposed to be spent on.
it keeps going back. Common sense. Why are we
Yeah.
paying illegals? Why are we paying big hotel? I mean, no one supports that. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, which is why I think the Democrats' message is rather muted, because how are you going to, I mean, they try, but
Yeah.
I think that it's so nebulous.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.